Hello and welcome to the TestRail 6.3 release webinar. I'm Simon Knight, Product Manager for TestRail, and there's a picture of me from about 10 years ago. You can find me on LinkedIn or Twitter. I've got a blog that I intermittently update, which you're welcome to take a look at as well. But if you really want to get in touch, please do so via the contact@guroc.com email address. I'd be very happy to hear from you. We're actively exploring features for new release and wanting to reach out to customers to have a conversation with them in that regard. So if that's something of interest to you, please do send us an email, and I'll just remind you of that email address again at the end. Also with me on the webinar today is Jacob Scott, one of our TestRail support engineers, one of our senior TestRail support engineers, I might add. He'll be taking questions throughout the webinar in the GoToWebinar console, and he'll be helping out with our Q&A section at the end of the webinar. We've also got Shanu Mandot joining us for the first time on this webinar. She'll be helping out with Q&A as well, and Shanu is our TestRail community manager, so very excited to have her and Jacob on board for the webinar today. I've got a few housekeeping announcements just before we get started properly. So today we're expecting the webinar to be relatively short. We're just covering off some of the new stuff in the TestRail 6.3 release. So we'll cover those, and there'll probably be some time for questions and answers at the end. But we're aiming for around about 30 minutes for the webinar. We might stretch it to 45 minutes, depending on how things are going. We'll be using the GoToWebinar chat console as usual to take questions throughout the webinar. So if you've got a question related to using TestRail, you can ask it directly in the GoToWebinar console, and either Jacob or Shanu will respond to your questions in the console itself. As you'd expect, we'll be keeping everybody on mute throughout the webinar, apart from Jacob and Shanu at the end for Q&A. As I mentioned, though, if you do have questions, please feel free to share those in the GoToWebinar chat room. Just to mention that we are recording the webinar, and we'll send out the link to that recording once it's being uploaded and processed and all of that stuff. All right, so without further ado, during the webinar today, we're going to be talking about the various improvements that we introduced with TestRail 6.3. So by the end of the webinar, hopefully you'll know a bit more about what we've done in TestRail 6.3 if you don't already know from the various announcements on the forum and on the blog, and via our emails as well. And hopefully you'll know a little bit more about why we wanted to implement those improvements, and the various features. And I might talk a little bit about some of the challenges that we faced along the way as well. The main thing that we wanted to accomplish in TestRail 6.3 was the enhanced connectivity between Jira and TestRail. Quite a few of our big customers have a number of TestRail instances that they want to connect to their Jira projects, both in the cloud and on-premise. And we wanted to provide those customers with a mechanism that allows them to connect all of their TestRail instances to a single Jira instance. So I'll be sharing a little bit about that. And most of the other things in the release were smaller bits and pieces that we either wanted to fix, improve upon, or just tidy up a little bit from some of our previous releases. Some of those improvements turned out to be a lot bigger than we first realized, so the release actually ended up taking a little bit longer than we originally expected. Okay, so onto the first feature then, which is the enhanced Jira to TestRail connectivity. So we deployed the TestRail 6.3 release last weekend, over the course of the 13th and 14th of June. And as a result of that release being deployed, you or your Jira administrator would have seen an update button against the Jira Cloud or the server plugin in the app management area of your Jira instance. So in here, basically. I'm hoping that you can all see my screen right now. You should be looking at Firefox with Jira being displayed. Jacob or Shanu, please do let me know if that's not the case. So here's what the configuration view for the TestRail for Jira test management plugin looks like in my cloud Jira sandbox instance here. And at the point of the update, if you still had the old plugin installed, then you would have seen an update button against this console here. I've updated my Jira app in my Jira instance here, so I can't see the update button at present. I know I'm using the right version though, because it's got this 1121 version number against it, and that's the version that you should see if you're a Jira administrator and you're looking at your TestRail for Jira test management app in your Jira instance. If you see something other than that, then the app is probably not going to work with TestRail in quite the way that you would like. So I do heartily recommend that you go into your Jira instance and update the app if you haven't already done so. We think that most people have at this point, or ask your administrator to do that for you if you don't have admin permissions.
One thing to note real quick, Simon, that version number is different on cloud and Jira server installations. So for Jira Cloud, it is that 1121-AC. On Jira server, it's a slightly different version number. Let me find it here just to avoid any confusion from our Jira server users.
Please do grab that, Jacob. Just while Jacob's grabbing that, I'll just mention that for Jira Cloud users, the process is pretty seamless. You just click that update button, and the app, which just kind of points at the code on our server, updates the description for the endpoints that it's actually able to reach and utilize. And once you've done that, then all of the new functionality would be available to you in the TestRail for Jira app config area. It sounds like Jacob is maybe back.
Yeah, it's the Jira server version for the most current version is 1.01.106-70.
Okay, great. Thank you for that, Jacob. So yeah, it's a little bit more complicated for Jira Server and data center customers, since they need to install the latest version of the app using the Jira Server or Jira Data Center plugin manager. And what that basically means is that the code needs to be downloaded and installed as a jar file for the Jira instance, hence the slightly different version number there, as Jacob pointed out. If you do have the new plugin version, though, it is compatible with older versions of TestRail. The changes aren't particularly dependent on code in the TestRail code itself, so it doesn't really care what version of TestRail you use. So long as you've got the new plugin, you're good to go, and you can connect to as many instances of TestRail as you need, whether those instances are cloud, server, TestRail 6.3 or not. And once this is all installed, you can configure the TestRail for Jira app to point at different TestRail instances by creating additional connections and configuring which projects you want to use with those connections. Let's just get rid of this for a second. And that, so you're just seeing Firefox in here. So if you click the configure button here, then Once this loads up, you'll see a configuration that I set up earlier in true Blue Peter style. Apologies if that reference is lost on our American audience. So here I've got 3 separate TestRail connections pointing at 3 separate TestRail instances on our staging environment. So I've got release webinar 1, release webinar 2, and release webinar 3. And each of those instances is also pointing at a separate project as well. And you can see that either here, where this instance is being utilized by this Jira project, the desktop project, or DES in its short form. And likewise, this instance here, release webinar 2, is being utilized by the mobile project in Jira, or MOB, again in its short form. And we've got a third instance set up here to release webinar 3, and that's being utilized by a web project in Jira. And it is important to note that you can only have one instance connected to one or more projects inside of Jira. You can't have a project in Jira that points at more than one TestRail instance. The configuration management area simply won't allow you to do that. And the reason for that is because when you go into one of your projects proper, so I'm going to go into this web project, wait for that to load up. So if I open up one of my issues in here, let's say this one, open up, don't you? Then when I, for example, attempt to create a test case in the connected TestRail instance from this project, the project needs to know which TestRail instance to actually create that test case in. And clearly, if it was connected to more than one TestRail instance, then this whole TestRail installation. I need to create an actual project in there, sorry. Then this process of adding test cases would become a little bit difficult. So what that is saying, so web, what that was saying is that this instance of TestRail doesn't actually have any projects in there at the minute. So let's go ahead and do that so that I can just demonstrate that functionality to you. So if I go into here, so you can see I need to actually create a project in there. So let's just call that webinar demo project. And we can add that in there. Let's get rid of this. Okay, and now hopefully, if I refresh this, probably didn't need to refresh it, but just wanted to be on the safe side. It's the stuff of nightmares, things going wrong in a live demonstration. Let's add this test case now. Yeah, there we go. So now I can add a test case in the project that I just created. So this webinar demo project, I can just go in there, and that's going to allow me just to create a test case in that project. And that works because this, let's close that. The configuration of the TestRail for Jira app is configured to point at this instance for this project. And obviously, well, probably not obviously, if you want to connect this instance to more than one project in your Jira instance, that's absolutely fine. You can do that by selecting your additional projects here and then just saving those, and then you can see those projects will get added to that connection like so. So you can have many projects pointing at one TestRail instance. You just can't have more than one TestRail instance pointing at a single Jira project. Hopefully I've explained that relatively clearly, but if there's any questions in that regard, probably we can cover those off in the Q&A section. Yeah, so I think that's pretty much it for the multiple connections from Jira to TestRail. So I'm just going to go back to my slide deck. So just to reiterate them, the main sort of big feature in TestRail 6.3 is enhanced Jira to TestRail connectivity, which allows you to configure different TestRail instances on a per project basis in Jira, as I showed you. And then once you've done that, in the normal fashion, really, the plugin automatically retrieves cases, test results, runs for your Jira issues based on the configurations that you've provided. So your project will automatically create your test cases or runs in the instance that you've connected to that Jira project. And yeah, basically what I just said, cases and runs can be created based on the configuration that you've provided. Okay, so the next thing, the next sort of new feature that we introduced in TestRail 6.3 was references on plan entries. So for this feature, we just wanted to continue adding references to various helpful entities within TestRail. A lot of our customers had asked about the capability of adding plans to the current Jira integration, the ability to be able to view plans as well as runs in the Jira issue TestRail tabs. We might still consider doing that in a future release, but for this particular release, we decided that it certainly would make sense to add references to plan entries or the runs in plans. So just continuing to provide the capability to add references to runs as being the kind of main entity that you would want to connect or to reference Jira issues and tickets from other integrated tools as well. So you can do that now on your plan entries, your runs in configuration-based test plans. So let's just take a quick look at what that looks like. Let's come out of here. So again, just something that I set up earlier. So if I go into a test run in here, I've got a test plan with configurations. So I set all of this up earlier. Hopefully most folk on this call are familiar with how you set up plans with configurations. So I've set up a basic kind of browser configuration here with a number of browsers that I might want to cover with different test runs in my plan. And so what this feature enables you to do is add references to the runs in those configuration-based plans. And you can add that either at the top level of your configuration based plan, which means that all of the runs in that configuration will inherit the reference that you've set at this top level. So you can see here, I haven't explicitly identified any references, any of the runs contained in that plan. But if I go in there and look at one of those runs, then it does have a reference because I've set it at the top level of that configuration-based plan. Alternatively, I can have explicit references or references at the level of the plan entries or the runs in my configuration-based plan here. So here I've got a reference at the top level. and then I can have different references for each of the plan entries in that plan. So then if I go to any one of those, then I'll be able to see the reference that I've added to that plan entry, like so. So let's go back to my slides again. Yeah, it works in pretty much the same way as the other settings on your configuration-based test runs. You can add a description and reference or references at the top level of your test run with configs, which is inherited throughout all of your configuration-based runs. You can add specific references to each of your plan entries if you wish. What we weren't quite able to accomplish with this release was the display of those runs in the JIRA issue runs tab, which is a little bit disappointing, but don't worry, we are working on that, and it will be available in a TestRail release very soon. And we also plan to add references to milestones in a future release as well, both of which are quite well advanced, so you can expect those features fairly soon. By popular demand in TestRail 6.3, we also added quite a number of new attachment endpoints, 6 in total. Add attachment to run, add attachment to plan, add attachment to plan entry, as well as get attachments for run, for plans, and for plan entries. All of those behave pretty much as you would expect, particularly if you're familiar with the existing attachment endpoints. So you can use the add attachment endpoints to upload attachments to the entities, to runs, plans, and plan entries. And you can use the get attachments endpoints to retrieve a list of attachments that are associated with the relevant entities. So I can just show you that real quickly if I open up Postman again. There we go. So here's a few requests that I set up earlier. Really simple. So you've got the post URL here with the endpoint, add attachment to run. So you need to know the run ID that you want to pass into that request. So I already know what that is, so I just hard coded that in there. And if I send this, then I'm going to get an attachment ID back. So you can see that's changed to 4. If I send it again, I'll get another one back. So that's changed to 5. And if I go to my run, does it run 13? So that's this one. And I can see those have both been uploaded. If I edit that run, I can delete those attachments. So those have gone. Send it again, get another one, refresh the page. The attachment is there. So that's pretty straightforward. Likewise with attachment to plan, send the attachment, get the ID, send attachment to plan entry. This one's a little bit different because you need the plan ID and the plan entry ID, which looks a little bit cryptic, but that's just the way plan entries work. So you need to have this ID as well as the plan number before you can upload your attachment. But then by doing so, you get the same result. And likewise for the get endpoints as well. If you send a request for your attachments, then you're going to get a list of the attachments for the entity against which you're making the request. So this one's for the plan entry, but if I want to change that to run, for example, then which one was it? 13. I can send a very similar request. Get attachments. Oh, that's not going to work, is it? Let's change that. There we go. And I'm going to get a list of the attachments back there. And you can still use the delete attachment endpoint if you want to remove any of those attachments via the API as well. And this also seems like a good time to mention that we've moved all of our API documentation to a new, funkier looking website. So there's that. Go and check that out. Okay, so as I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, we implemented quite a number of fixes in the TestRail 6.3 release as well. Here's a list of them all. I appreciate that from a slide perspective, having a long list of text like this isn't the greatest thing. Pretty hard to read, particularly if you're dialing in from a mobile device or something. And for the most part, you can just read about those fixes in our release announcements. If you want to know more about them, I'm not going to go through all of them on this webinar. I will mention a couple of them though. So attachments not being deleted from the underlying file system. This caused us quite a lot of work. Over time, we noticed that when cases, runs, plans, projects, etc., were removed from TestRail, the parent entities for those things, for the runs, plans, projects, what have you, were being removed. But what was happening was the entries for the attachments that were linked to those entities in our database, those weren't being removed. So basically, for example, if you deleted a test case with an attachment, the test case would be removed, but the attachment would remain both in the database and on the file system. So we wanted to kind of address that issue a little bit for the sake of performance and for various other sort of operational reasons. We've had a process that's been running for quite a period of time now that's been cleaning up all of our cloud instances with this problem. Project Deadwood, as it's affectionately known internally, and what we've been doing is pruning those databases of all of the orphaned attachments and just trying to clean things up a little bit. But what that process wasn't really doing was addressing the sort of underlying functional issue that was causing those attachments to be left in the database and on the file system in the first place. So we wanted to try and address that with this release. And what we've done is in this release, we've introduced a couple of new tables in the TestRail database that basically track attachments and the relationship of those attachments to entities within TestRail. And that basically means two things for our TestRail customers. When attachments are explicitly deleted from a TestRail entity, so for example, if you go into a test case or a test run like this and delete your attachment here, then that's actually going to get removed from the database and from the underlying file system. The other thing that it means is that if an attachment becomes demonstrably orphaned as a result of, for example, instead of deleting the attachment as I just did, deleting the test run instead, which means you end up with an attachment that isn't related to anything any longer, we've now got like a garbage collection process that will just run in the background and clean up those attachments from the file system in our cloud environment and from the database as well. So orphan attachments are not deleted for server customers. I should mention that. They are deleted. So as I mentioned before, when you delete them from, for example, the test run here, those will be deleted from the file system for server customers. But what we don't have for server customers is this kind of background garbage collection process. That's only for cloud customers. And when attachments, I've already mentioned that, I think. So there were, we've discovered a few sort of known issues with this implementation. So a few problems that you might experience that we're working on fixes for is deletion from plans and plan entries. Can be a little bit quirky sometimes. Cancelling out of an upload dialog. So for example, if you're in a test case and you upload an image to a text field in that test case and then just kind of cancel it and decide that you didn't want to upload that image after all, that does still actually get uploaded and needs to be deleted. Deleting the attachment reference from within a test case. So if you've linked to an attachment as a text reference in your test case, just deleting that from inside of your test case won't actually remove the attachment. And we also discovered an issue where deleting attachments from copied test cases also removes the attachment from the origin test case. But all of those issues are being worked on and we'll have fixes for those soon as well. So there's that. Did I move to the right slide? I feel like I missed something. Yes. So I wanted to mention this as well. The deprecation of the create meta Jira API endpoint. So we implemented a change to the Jira defect plugin, which implemented a replacement endpoint from Jira in anticipation of them deprecating the create meta endpoint in their upcoming Jira 9.0 release. Basically, we didn't want their 9.0 release to break our TestRail for Jira plugin. So we implemented that, but unfortunately, if you're using the plugin with custom fields at present, the push defect functionality isn't working properly. So you can work around that issue at present just by disabling the custom fields in the plugin, and then you can use the TestRail for Jira plugin as normal. But yeah, that is an issue at present. However, again, we're expecting a fix very soon for that. In fact, I'm hoping that's going to go out tomorrow. Okay, so as you might imagine, with what, as I mentioned in the last couple of slides, has been a fairly complicated release for us. We identified a few other issues post-deployment. The biggest one was a performance issue that we very quickly became aware of when everybody woke up on Monday morning after the release. We fixed that one very quickly, so nobody should be experiencing any performance issues with their TestRail instances as a result of that. I've already mentioned the Jira push defect problem with custom fields, so we're expecting to deploy a fix for this very soon. We noticed an issue where sometimes the project selections don't get saved when updating the Jira app config. We're going to have a fix for this very shortly as well, but in the meantime, you can work around that issue by deleting the connection and re-inputting the configuration details. I already mentioned the attachment deletion problems. And we identified a small UX issue that only seems to be affecting Chrome. We're working on a fix for that. And yeah, basically, there's a few issues, but we are working on fixes for those, and they will be released very soon. So with all of that, I think I'm done with the slides, so we can probably go to our questions and answers. So welcome back. Well, welcome, in fact, Jacob and Shanu, who are going to take us through a few of those, I think.
All right, let's go ahead and grab a couple. We didn't have a ton of questions that came in that I thought might be good for discussing, but we'll definitely take a look here. So one user asked, can you show me about test cases in TestRail when they're generated from Jira? And does the test case automatically show the link to Jira? Yes, when you create a new test case from inside of Jira using that like add test case button, it definitely should automatically add the link to the issue that you're creating in. So in this case, Simon is coming in from the Jira issue web 1. And as you can see, when he comes into this new test case, that reference to web 1 is already present. So when you do click on that, that add test case button from inside of Jira, it does just automatically pre-fill that reference to that issue that you were in, which will in turn link that this test case to that Jira issue. So when you go into the Jira issue as well, you should see the link to test case 1. So another question just came in, and this is actually a pretty good question, and it's one that I know I know I personally submitted a request about this recently. It's something that we're looking into, and we do hope to set up a fix for it in the future. But right now, they mentioned when you add a new test via Jira and you get the list of projects to create your test case in, can we have a way to only show active projects and hide the completed projects? Yeah, because if you have a lot of projects and you've marked a lot of projects as completed, they will still display here and allow you to create a test case in a completed project, which shouldn't be the case, and that is something that we'll be looking into a fix for an upcoming version. There's not anything in the system now that would prevent that, but that is something that we are looking into. All right, so we do have another question here. Can you describe a use case for the plan references? So that's adding references to the plan entries. Really, I think the best use case I've come across for that is if you're using like a Jira like Scrum board where you're doing sprints. You can use your references inside of your plan entries to go to sprints. Alternatively, if you're creating specific runs within your plan to be specific to a certain requirement, then that would also be a good use case for that. So like if each of the different configurations are being tested against a different requirement in the system, or you've got different sprints for like different operating systems or different browsers, that sort of thing, then that's going to be really good for just tying those specific runs and those specific configuration setups to different sprints that way.
So you can see that in how I set these issues up in Jira as well to some extent. So we've got like a story for whatever it is I'm trying to implement up here, and then there might be some subtasks relating to that story that reference specific requirements. So this feature needs to work against Chrome, it needs to work against Safari, etc. And then you've got the ability now in TestRail to reference each of these sort of coverage issues individually within TestRail.
All right. Let's see. This is a little bit off topic, but just to address it, while importing test cases from Excel, the images are not imported to TestRail. That's a bit of a technical challenge there for importing images directly from a file. For starters, there's not a way to import a file from Excel. It's going to need to be a CSV file, which a traditional CSV file is not going to support direct image embedding. And importing images from within an existing file is definitely a trickier kind of system than than you might think. That's something that we do have some requests for that, and that's something that I'll add some feedback to our internal request about importing images, but I can't currently give any kind of time frame for that. I know it's not a super high priority at the moment, but it is something that we'll look into and see if there is an option for that.
And if you want to import a lot of images, probably the easiest thing to do is going to be to use the API, for which, as I mentioned during the slides, we've implemented a whole bunch of new endpoints to allow you to do exactly that, to upload images to TestRail using the API.
Okay, can we integrate in Jira NextGen with TestRail? Yes, pretty much any type of Jira project is going to work with TestRail. The different options might be hidden a little bit. You might have to tinker a little bit with it, because I know with some of the next-gen project types, they do kind of tend to hide those things a little bit. So, you'll need to kind of look around to make sure you can find all of the different options to display things, but that's going to be about it. Okay, so we're getting really close to our questions here, or to our time here. So I'm going to go ahead and say these are the last couple of questions we'll be going over. So can we link a run or plan to user story in Jira board? Yes, it's going to be that same excuse me, that same references field. So pretty much any Jira entity, as long as it's got that traditional Jira ID, you can link it. So it can be a story, it can be an epic, it can be a bug or a feature request, or whatever type of issues or like whatever issue types you've created inside of your Jira instance. You should be able to link a TestRail test case or test run plan entry. Whatever entity in TestRail, if it's got that references field, you should be able to link it to whatever Jira entity you're looking for. Is there going to be TestRail webhook support in the future? That is something that we are looking into for sure. That is definitely a fairly common request, and our dev team is aware of the desire for that by a number of our users. So it's something that we will be exploring for sure in the future.
So that brings me back to my original point. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, we are actively looking into new features for TestRail. We've got lots of stuff in the pipeline. So just to give you an idea of the kind of things that we're working on at the moment, we're looking at shared test steps. We're looking at version control and improved test case review capabilities. We want to make further improvements to the TestRail API. We want to improve TestRail reporting, and yes, we want to implement webhooks in TestRail to help you improve your test automation pipelines and communication between TestRail and other endpoints that you want to use. We're also looking at things like test data parameterization and management inside of TestRail as well. And to make these features as good as they can possibly be, we want to hear from you, our customers. We want to talk to you, and we want to learn from you about the challenges that you're facing, so that we can help you by building a product that helps you to overcome those challenges. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, you can find me in various places, but we'd also be very happy to hear from you via the contact@gurup.com email address. If you're interested in having a conversation with myself and John, our other TestRail product manager here, about how we can implement features that are going to help you and your team overcome your specific challenges. So with that, I'll just say thank you very much to everybody for joining the webinar. We appreciate you all taking the time out to join us here today, and we will see you at the next one. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.